Thank you for coming to today's Easy Earth Talks, where we are going to have Dr. Chris Widga presenting on museums as partners in broader impact activities. Chris is the director of the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Art Gallery and a research professor here at Penn State in the Department of Geosciences. Over the last 20 years, he has integrated cutting-edge paleontological and earth science research into public outreach efforts and museum programming. Chris's interest in emerging technologies has led to the development of immersive 3D resources, mobile apps, and data-rich online experiences that draw directly from museum collections. He has developed SciComm workshops for scientists and was co-host of the weekly science news program, Paleo Talks.
Cool, thank you.
Take it away.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. This is a passion project of mine, in addition to kind of being one of the things that we do as museum curators, as museum directors, and museum people. So I'm really glad to be able to talk about the broader impacts activities and kind of how they articulate with museums, or how museums can articulate with broader impacts activities. I'm putting both myself and Patty Wood-Finkel up here as presenters. Patty Wood-Finkel is our curator, and so oftentimes you will see us interchangeably, and we stay in pretty good contact with each other and that sort of thing. So as I move forward through this presentation, you know, if you're like, oh, that's really cool, and you for whatever reason you can't get a hold of me, or you run into Patty in a meeting or something like that, then feel free to talk to her about some of these things too. So first, kind of just to orient yourself, who are we? We are the Penn State Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Art Gallery. We have two facilities. Off campus, we have the Center for Education, Research, and Collections in what is called the Special Services Building. If you Google it, it's actually the old radio astronomy building, so it's a little bit hard to find. But we have basically occupy the first floor of this building with our collections. We have about 22,000 specimens. That's art, earth materials, science and technology, a little bit of everything. Our archive, everything is out there. That is really the core of our collections. That's where Patty's office is, that we have lots of students and interns that work in that space every semester. But then on campus, our public face is the museum gallery, and this is the first floor of the Dyke building. This was recently renovated over COVID, and it's a beautiful space. It's a place to kind of show off the science that we do in EMS, show off the art in the collections and that sort of thing, kind of bring it all together. As for people, you can see some of these people are actually in the audience, but there's me as director, Patty as our curator. We have, as of last semester, we have a student organization called MANTLE, the Museum Advisory Network to Leverage Engagement. That's right, Zach, right? Yes, good. Okay, so we have a pretty good student group that's very engaged, very enthusiastic. They help with programming, they help with outreach, that sort of thing. It's also a pre-professional group, so we can do things like talks, and we can do, you know, what is it like to work in museums? So it's a very, very fun group to have, very engaged group of students. Then we also have our advisory board. And they are feeding into the museum. They're advising the museum in terms of what our priorities could be, how we connect to our community better, and that sort of thing. So these are who we are. And I kind of put us all up there collectively because it's not just me, it's not just Patty, it's not just the staff. Collectively, it is a community effort. And when I say community, you know, we kind of think about a service audience. And so who is our service audience? Who does the museum serve? Within EMS, we have 5 departments and 3 institutes. Full stop. We definitely serve all those people, or that's the goal, is to serve all those units. We serve students, and I say students very broadly. It's not just EMS students, it's at campus-wide. We see students involved at all levels in the museum from across campus, as well as EMS. Faculty and researchers, and I'll talk more about that in a couple of slides, alumni, donors, and community members. One of the cool things about this museum is that through the year, you kind of see this seasonal change in an audience. So if you sit and you watch the door in the fall, you see a lot of first year EMS students or people that are new to EMS trying to orient themselves. In the spring, you see a lot of of broad campus use, whether it's an English class or a foreign language class or medical students. They're coming into the gallery and they're using that space for other uses. And it just is a really good space to be able to do that. If you start looking at May and in the summer, and then you start seeing adults coming into the museum that are unaffiliated with Penn State. They're off-campus communities. But every one of them is trailing 1 or 2 kids. So we are reaching families as the campus kind of slows down during the summer, as parking gets a little bit easier. Then we are actually reaching out to the community where we are serving this community in a very real way. But the other thing I want to point out is the Modern Museum is not just about physical audiences. It's not just about the people that walk in the door. We're also serving a virtual audience. And so being able to build our website, being able to build our social media channels, being able to build our communication channels, these are part of what we do. And it takes time, and we are still building, but we will get there. And so these are recognizing that these are both physical and virtual audiences is important. But first, there's probably a little bit of unpacking that I need to do. A lot of times we think about a museum, and even the dictionary gets confused with this, but a museum as a building, as a physical manifestation of old things in glass cases. And when you talk to museum professionals, when you talk to me, when you talk to Patty or others, then you kind of get a different impression of what a museum is. And so it's worth it to kind of look at kind of unpack this definition. And this is a definition that has changed through time. And in the last 15, 20 years, what a museum has changed drastically. So if you went to a museum in the 1970s or the 1980s, very, very different kind of institution and different kinds of goals than what we have today. So the International Council of Museums, and this is a definition that we subscribe to for sure, basically says a museum is not for profit, it's permanent, and it's in the service of society. Okay, that right there is where we're at. We are a service institution. We are serving society. It researches, collects, conserves, interprets, and exhibits tangible and intangible heritage. So not just tangible, not just things in boxes, but also intangible heritage. We're telling stories that may not be kind of that object itself, but we're extending that object and the importance and the significance of that object, culturally and socially. Open to the public, accessible and inclusive, fosters diversity and sustainability. These are important things to being the definition of a museum, to being a museum. Operating and communicating ethically, professionally, and participation of communities. Participation of communities, key clause there. Offering varied experiences for education, enjoyment, reflection, and knowledge sharing. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these things today, because this is kind of getting into that broader impacts aspect of things. The other thing is museums are kind of unique institutions, as in this day and age where we have kind of a fragmented media environment, we have a fragmented knowledge environment. They are still very much trusted sources of information, trusted and accurate. So this is a report from a couple of years ago, but looking at institutions that you trust, who do you trust? Museums rank very high up near friends and family, slightly above researchers and scientists. Not saying anything, there's no shade there. They're slightly above nonprofits and organizations and NGOs, certainly above news agencies and the government. So we are kind of trusted institutions, kind of globally. So this is something in this environment that we want to, maintain. It's something we take very seriously. We want to, have accurate information. We want to serve our audiences and in real ways. And this is what you get when you decide to partner with a museum for your broader impact studies. So kind of moving on from museums in general to the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum and Art Gallery specifically, we've changed through time. Just like the idea of what a museum is has changed through time. Certainly the Earth and Mineral Sciences Museum has changed through time. And so we've got like 1917, this is the Mining Museum in a building that no longer exists on campus. And in truth in reporting, I false colored these just to see what it would do. And AI is not completely successful at doing that, but it does make them a little bit more engaging. So 1917, we have the Mining Museum. And some of these things in this picture still exist in our collection. This is a case of mining lamps on the back wall, all of which exist in our collection. This map along this wall, this topographic map, I think is one that is on exhibit in our gallery today. So there's this long tail of preservation that museums have. In 1957, we have, for many years, for much of the 20th century, the museum was occupied the Steidl building. And so it was, on some accounts, it was almost 3/4 of a mile of exhibits. So, many, many hallways of exhibits, and kind of, it was an exhibits museum. The idea of a museum at that point was not so much having thousands of specimens for research in the background, but having things on exhibit that can be used in teaching and training and kind of for the public and that sort of thing. So this is really where we were at in the 20th century. And then today, this is a picture of our gallery as it looked last week. And this is, we are talking about, every one of the, well, not every one, but most of these exhibits are done in collaboration with scientists. They're done in collaboration with EMS community members in a way that, is able to make this museum a little bit more of everybody's museum. And so that's kind of the shift that has happened in the last couple of decades in museums, and we reflect that too. This shift, some of it is just kind of retooling how we think about museums and what is a museum. And I like to think about a museum as like a three-legged stool. And each leg, if you aren't doing one of those legs, then the whole stool is going to fall over. So collections and research is one aspect of what we do, exhibits and programs another, and then outreach and education. Those are all extremely important. We can't take one without the other. And of course, when we start talking about things like outreach and education, exhibits and programs, collections and research, we have to talk about them in the context of a museum as a service organization, which means we need to assess what are the needs of our community, what are the needs of the people that we are trying to serve. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what those needs might be. And some of these are broader impacts, but I'm going to start with kind of this research and repository function. So the collections aspects of museums. This is what you think about when you think about a museum. There's lots of stuff in a building. But how museums really differ from having a bunch of things in an attic is where we're basically vouchering specimens for the future. Things in the museum are not going to be divested from that museum unless there are lots of hoops that you can jump through. So even if the museum ceases to exist, that has happened, I will acknowledge that, then that museum is thinking about where do I transfer these collections where they can still be accessible. That is our first responsibility. That is our first role. That is our core. And so, this research and repository function is something that's very important to us. And for Penn State, it will continue to be important to us right now. Some of you may be aware that there is a draft policy in the works on research data management. This is something I just checked last week. It's still a draft policy, but it will probably become kind of rolled into Penn State policy in the next couple of months. But data management includes physical specimens and samples. And that's something that we need to include. That is explicit in this data management policy. So, if you're wondering where can I put these specimens that need to be vouchered for the future, there are probably museum collections that are consistent with that view. The other thing that we do very well is managing metadata and digital twins in perpetuity. What does that mean? That means that if you've got a physical specimen, what are the things that are connected to that? If it's a bone, do you have DNA from it? Do you have radiocarbon dates? If it's a rock, do you have geochemical data? Do you have reflectance data? All these other things that we do to physical specimens, they are tied to that physical specimen. And what museums do very well is keep that information tied to the specimen. So talking about metadata, in fact, we call it the extended specimen in some cases. So, we have the physical object, but then we have all these different data sets that might tie to it. And the cool thing about that, and this has been something that's kind of been developed over the last 10 years or so, is that we keep that internally as a museum, but it also is kind of blossoming as an umbrella database that is accessible of multiple museums. So databases of databases. And that's where like EarthCube comes in. These are in GBIF, which is biological data. SESAR is geological data, basically taking that specimen and making sure that not only if you are looking for a rock or a sample or a voucher from a specific place in a specific time, and there are multiple museums that might house something like that, then you only have to search one search portal. You don't have to know that Penn State might have this rock or this specimen. It means that you can go to a single portal and find out that Penn State has it, but so does Harvard, and so does Princeton, and so does Santa Barbara. So kind of thinking in terms of digital infrastructure and scaling up. We're trying to make the world accessible behind the scenes. The other thing, kind of thinking about repositories and thinking about this building collections and that sort of things. I read a lot of science fiction, and this time of year, I think about optimistic science fiction. So interstellar arcs are always these as the Earth is dying, the people of Earth build these interstellar arcs, and they put their best and brightest onto the interstellar arcs and send them off into the void, hoping that they will find some other planet to terraform and survive. Museums are kind of like that. You collect in the moment, you collect in the present, and you deposit it in a museum with the hope that someday this is going to be very, very useful to somebody. And I can tell you, having worked in museums for the last 15, 20 years, often, yes, the answer is very much so. This is useful to somebody. So, to give you a couple of, these are multi-generational repositories. So I have no idea. Well, I have some ideas, but I probably don't have very many ideas of how we are going to analyze some of these specimens 20, 30 years in the future. But my job is to make sure that those specimens are still available when somebody wants to look at them 20 or 30 years in the future. If we go back in time, if we go back to the 80s, to the 90s, the idea of getting something like DNA out of fossils was just the stuff of science fiction. And now it is routine. So we are constantly thinking about reuse and reanalysis of these collections. We balance preservation and use. So the goal is to preserve these things in perpetuity, but we also want to learn from them. If we can't learn from them, then why are we keeping them around? So balancing preservation and use, but then also through time, these collections grow and there are societal benefits. These are just a couple of quick screen grabs. So this is Maureen Feynman, one of our geosciences professors, ogling our earth sciences collection, our earth materials collection. She was really excited at this drawer, obviously. But we also have things like, this was something that surfaced last year. Patty found this tucked away in one of our cabinets. And these are thin sections of the Penn State obelisk, the rocks that make up the Penn State obelisk. And this was a part of a senior thesis in 1899 by William Affelder. And so we can go back 100 years, 124 years, and still kind of gain information and analyze some of these specimens. I've been doing some traveling, and Pennsylvania is filled with old museums, and there are some really fun things to look at. I looked at a fossil collection from Big Bone Lake, Kentucky that was collected by William Clark in 1806 for Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson touched those fossils, thought about those fossils. At the time, he thought that the mastodons in this collection lived somewhere out west. We now know that's not the case, but I can go back and I can look at the same thing that Jefferson was looking at, which is really cool. This is a collection that we've been trying to chase down. This one This is a part of a collection that we're trying to chase down. This is the first Pennsylvania geological survey that was done by Henry Darwin and Rogers in the middle 1800s. And there are theoretically about 5,000 specimens somewhere out there. He gifted them to different institutions, including Penn State. We've been able to chase down about 300 specimens that are at the State Museum in Harrisburg. So we can still go back. We can align these specimens with Henry Darwin Rogers' reports. What the landscape looked like at that time, what outcrops were available at that time, and that sort of thing. So, thinking they did not collect these things with the idea that we would be going back and looking at the geochemistry of them, or that we'd be able to radiocarbon date or get DNA out of this stuff. They collected them because of the science at the time. But things change, and you're able to really use some of these collections. What does this look like through time? So this is the EMS collection, the EMS museum collection. And so this is some kind of first pass at visualizing what this collection looks like. We have a global scope. We have specimens, whether they're earth materials or fine art or technology, specimens representing all major continents, and obviously a lot of North America and Europe, but also a fair amount of South America and a lot of South Africa and Australia. We have been everywhere, and we've been collecting everywhere, and these end up back in the collections of the EMS Museum. We're going through and digitizing everything. So this is a data set that will be available online and accessible by researchers, accessible by students and teachers and whoever needs to access it, and for whatever reason they need to. And so I'll get back to I should make it a law, but the law of unintended reuse of museum collections. But we also have this great fine art collection, the Steidl collection of American industrial art, that documents the industries of earth industries in Pennsylvania. We also have a collection that looks at the history of technology and teaching. So things like these crystal models from Evan Pugh, the first Penn State president, that he created as a student. We have things like glass test tubes that he blew in Germany as a student. So there's a lot of, and everything in between. We have chalkboard globes. We have stereoscope viewers. So there's a lot of things that kind of show how these sciences have changed through time, and they're represented in our collection. A lot of what we're trying to do right now is digitize and move these collections, move the records of these collections online. So not only they aren't just accessible if you come and ask me, do you have X? It's a little looser. Much of the Steidl art collection is, about half of the Steidl art collection is online, a little over half, and through the library. We're working on completing an inventory of the earth and synthetic materials collection, making sure that that can make it online. These things can be authentic, can be retooled for authentic research in K-12 educational modules. So thinking about inquiry-driven learning, thinking about broader impacts of creating educational materials, and using kind of things like these databases, these scientific databases online to address some of these educational goals. That's totally doable. And then more, basically the sky is the limit. A lot of what I've done before coming here is thinking about mobile apps, thinking about 3D models, thinking about kind of where are the edges of technology now and where are we going in the future? And I don't have the answers, but we're always experimenting. And we're always kind of testing and probing and say, okay, is this a direction that is going to be successful? And if it is, we keep going that way. If it isn't, then we shift. And that's not a problem. We are a small museum. It makes us nimble. It makes us flexible. And we're totally game to try lots of different things. But we also are also part of kind of a broader ecosystem of Penn State museums. And I say this because I know that not everybody here is EMS, but we have at least, at last count, and I just got an email in my inbox about 20 minutes ago that upped this count, but we have about 48 collections across campus. This is everything from fish to mushrooms to art, to fabrics and textiles, and everything in between. And so right now, these collections are fairly siloed, but we have the Penn State Museum Consortium, which basically provides a platform for us to talk together and say, where are the places where we can build together? Where are the places that we need to scale as a community, as a museum community? And then this is a draft report. This is at least the cover of a draft report that we'll be submitting very soon. That is kind of the current status of collections on Penn State, offering some suggestions for infrastructure growth, but also kind of saying, okay, what do we have? Because in many ways, we didn't know, or it was at least kind of piecemeal up until this point. And so this is a first attempt at kind of being a bit more comprehensive and standardized in this approach, which is really fun and really encouraging. So moving on from collections and shifting kind of more towards this public-facing aspects of museums, and what we're really here to talk about, which is broader impacts. I think about those other two legs, the exhibits and the education and outreach legs, as basically kind of science communication and informal science learning. There's kind of multiple ways that we can think about these things. And I'm breaking it out at least into in-person, which is kind of gallery exhibits and programs, outreach or off-campus, whether it's school visits to STEM night, whether it's a table at a festival. These are sometimes those places where you're going to reach people that you aren't going to reach otherwise. There are people that are wandering around a barbecue festival and they would never set foot in a museum, but they stop at your table and they're like, what is that? So it's a moment of engagement of an audience that you won't normally get any other way. So outreach and off campus is very important. And then digital. And so like I said, museums are in the 21st century. We're really shifting a lot of energy into online resources and social media, in part because there's a lot of potential for growth there. There's a lot of potential for reaching audiences that we wouldn't otherwise normally reach. Physical audiences are really going to be only those people that can walk into your door. Are we a destination museum here? Probably not for most people. I mean, I will be honest, but we can reach to Philly, we can reach to Pittsburgh, we can reach to California or Australia online. And so these are places where we also need to invest. So we'll first talk about a little bit about exhibits. These are some examples of exhibits that have gone up in about the last 6 months in the EMS gallery. So Tsunami Sharma basically is a graduate student in energy and mineral engineering. And she kind of had a survey that she sent out to her fellow graduate students and said, are you doing sustainability research? And if you are, can you explain it to me? And then I'm going to create an exhibit around this in the museum. And this was something that she was very passionate about. And in the end, we're featuring, I think 5 or 6 different student projects that are really focused on sustainability. Juliana Hart is an intern. She's still interning with us, building or curating an exhibition on air quality and using stidal art to tell the story of air quality in Pittsburgh. So not only using the art to tell the story that it was originally intended to do, but using it for new perspectives and kind of placing it within a different context. Pride Rocks exhibit is Denali Kincaid, who, if you haven't seen her viral TikTok page, look her up, fun stuff. But she worked with us to design this Pride Rocks exhibit, which is using earth materials to tell the story of LGBTQ scientists and a history. So, thinking about, okay, what kind of material can we tell the story of the Stonewall riots? Things like that. You can use specimens, you can use objects to tell stories that may not be related to their original reason for being collected. And so this is one of the things that kind of keeps us relevant. It keeps us kind of in the moment. It keeps us responsible to our current research community, to our current community. And so there's a lot of flexibility that can go into the stories that we tell through exhibits. So ultimately, our museum gallery is a really dynamic and changing environment. We did 16 different exhibits last year. It was a case here and a case there. So, it might be a couple of walls of art, but it's constantly changing. So if you haven't visited in a month or two, go back. Things have probably changed. But then also the other kind of take home here is that exhibits are often developed in collaboration with EMS students and faculty. So we, Patty and I, we have expertise. We are generalists, though. My expertise is in paleontology, somewhat in geology, and the history of science and that sort of thing. If you ask me about the details of tectonics, tectonic research that's happening at Penn State or geodynamics or something like that, I have no idea. I work with those professors. I work with those researchers. We work with them to help tell the stories that they want to tell in a non-technical way to the public. And so a lot of our museums or a lot of our exhibits are developed in collaboration with these experts. That comes back to the reason why museums are trusted, because we work to tell the right story. We work to tell the most accurate story that we can. Getting at kind of what this looks like in a broader impacts context. These are 3 exhibits that we currently have on display in the gallery that were developed as broader impacts exhibits as extensions of National Science Foundation funding. So Kim Lau and Katie Horisk developed an exhibit called The Cretaceous Oceans. Andy Smye and Charlotte Canup developed Architecture of Continents, and then Josh Garber and Sarah Ambrosiak just installed one over the summer called Metamorphic Souls, Stories of Subduction. And so these are National Science Foundation projects where funding is included in those proposals to develop a public-facing exhibit. And each one of these, I include 2 names up here because each one of these exhibits and something that we've found is a really good kind of recipe for these sorts of exhibits is the PI and a graduate student. And so each one of these, Katie, Charlotte, and Sarah, well, Katie and Charlotte are graduate students, Sarah is an undergraduate student. And so, working with us to refine a message, to refine the story, make sure it's accurate, working to make a design that works all together as a coherent design for a non-technical audience. That is a recipe that seems to work really well in our museum. The budgets, just to kind of get into some of the nitty gritty, the budgets can range from $1,000 to $15,000, at least in terms of these 3 exhibits. $1,000 will be costs of printing. It might be some graduate student time to help with the design, to help with the story development. $15,000 might include the purchase of a new exhibit case. Exhibit cases are not cheap. So kind of thinking about budget, we can probably, I won't guarantee this, but our gallery sees about 4,000 people a year. That is 8,000 guaranteed measured eyeballs. So if you're thinking about impact, if you're thinking about outreach, having some metric that you can measure is a good one. And we can measure this. We can measure the visitors that are in the gallery. We can say that they're a broad audience. Right now, we don't have a lot of data on who exactly it is. Is it 10% EMS community and 90% community, central Pennsylvania? We don't know that, but we do know it is a very broad audience, and we're reaching off-campus as well as campus audiences, which is good. But the other thing that people often don't think about until kind of the bitter end of they get the exhibit installed and they're like, oh, I can walk away now. No, there's potential for more. So there's a lot of potential for spin-off gallery programs. And this is what I'll get into that in just a minute. What does this process look like if you're really diving into it? Basically you would kind of sit down with Patty Wood-Finkel and I, and we would talk about budget, we would talk about planning, we would try and refine a message. What is the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you really want everyone that sees this exhibit to walk away knowing? It comes back to kind of very, very clear and concise communication. There's a design and production phase where we're starting to talk about figures, we're talking about flow, we're talking about storyline and that sort of thing. There's installation, all these things. they can happen quickly, but they don't happen quickly. Very rarely do they happen quickly. This is kind of your basic process. But there's often more things that pop up down the road. So whether it's marketing, so we can get people in to see your exhibit, if it's targeted marketing, so you really want certain demographic groups or certain educational groups to make sure that they see this exhibit, then we may be doing some targeted marketing. If we wanted to design some programs or some events around, and this I will come back to this, then that also needs to be taken into consideration. And ultimately, we also need to evaluate it in some way. Is our message being successful? And this is something that we're trying to work in a system to be able to do this, and a framework to be able to kind of do this. And the more broader impacts exhibits that we have, the more fine-tuned and streamlined this process will be. So in-person programs. And so exhibits are what people usually think of when we talk about museums and broader impacts. But we can also do these in-person programs. Basically, our museum with a staff of 2, we are people limited. We are not so much resource limited. Exhibits, well, we are resource limited too, obviously, but in-person programs, we like to partner with people. So if you have graduate students or students that want to develop some of these programs where you're talking to 4th graders, or you're creating something for a walking by audience, a point of engagement or something like that, then let's talk. Basically, about half of all the visitors to our gallery are part of facilitated program. They're part of some sort of program where somebody reaches out to us and says, I want to bring my classroom of 20 5th graders to the museum gallery. Do you have a program for us? And we're like, sure, we have X, Y, and Z. So about half of our visitors, so 2,000 people, are part of these facilitated programs. Lots of K-12 classrooms, but it's also pretty broad. So scouting and civic groups, we have Penn State groups, we have kind of everywhere. And museums are one of those destinations that you set up and you want to go to as a group. Everything from Shavers Creek brings their nature journaling club a couple of times a year. One of the oddest facilitated programs we did last year was an exchange program of Italian medical students who were practicing their English on our exhibits. So there's a lot of variability here, and it's always fun. It's always very dynamic. But obviously, we're also kind of going online. One of the things that, and I bring this in, we are not web experts. We don't have the capacity to do a lot of web development. But what we do have is kind of that long-term perspective. If you think about the stability of web content, that's kind of an oxymoron. It's not stable. If you think about how long it's going to remain online in a usable way, sometimes that's measured in less than a decade, less than 5 years. Our goal for anything that is online is to make sure that it's at least supported as long as we can. So if we need to upgrade a server, or if we need to upgrade a database, if we need to look for a new database to transfer all this data to because there's now some new solution out there, then that's something that we can do as a museum. We're taking that long-term view of managing this metadata. I throw this up as an example. This was a project by actually my predecessor, Russ Graham, in the late 80s, early 90s, creating a database of quaternary mammal localities. And he did this as a curator at the Illinois State Museum. This book came out as a 2-volume set in 1994, and it was a home-brewed database internally from the Illinois State Museum, and went online in 1994. When I arrived at the Illinois State Museum in 2007, people would still be using this database online. Even though there were better and more updated sources of this data out there, they were still going, why is this not working? and we'd like, oh, okay, we'll fix it and get it back to you. So, we're archiving as much as we can. We're keeping things alive as much as we can. So it's a really good, FONMAP is a good example of kind of that long tail of research and making things available over the long run. But the other part of this is thinking about unintentional reuse. I'll talk about a little bit about this first. So first of all, once you create these databases, once you create these resources, you can then create educational resources that use those as authentic research. So this was an example that I was involved in a couple of years ago it was a partnership with the Milwaukee Public Museum, where we were working with fourth grade classrooms to do research on mammoths in the Great Lakes in the Midwest and develop a database for that. But it was kind of targeted outreach to inner city schools. These were classrooms that in some cases the teachers themselves said this class has been left behind. And your engagement with them on this subject, they've been more engaged with this project than they have been with anything else all year long. So there's a potential for kind of these unique engagement opportunities and directed engagement. So reaching populations, reaching audiences that aren't normally reached. So we have some digital outreach. Accessibility, this is something that I've been thinking more and more about in the last couple of years as we have better technology for immersive experiences like virtual reality and that sort of thing. If we can get virtual reality experiences that reflect places that aren't easy to get to. In my last position in the Southern Appalachians, we had beautiful areas that were up high in the mountains. Students from Nashville wouldn't be able to get there. Students from DC wouldn't be able to get there. Students that were mobility impaired would not be able to get there. And so being able to bring some of those immersive environments online in a way that is accessible for those classrooms, it becomes an accessibility issue, and it's a way that we can promote that. But then, like I said, we can also do directed outreach to these underserved communities. Getting back to this idea of unintentional reuse, it's kind of fun, and I bring this up. Last month, I had a former student that sent me a picture, texted me this picture, and they're like, "Does this look familiar?" And I looked at it, and I'm like, "Yes, that does look familiar. That looks like a tapir skull that I 3D scanned from the Gray Fossil Site many years ago. We put it up online. You know, having 3D scans means that you can kind of engage with those fossils in a new and unique way. You can spin them around, you can zoom in and zoom out. You could download them and 3D print them if you wanted. So you could create your own museum if you wanted. And that's what happened in this video game that just came out. So Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, big video game that just came out. It's been downloaded millions of times at this point. And they used real 3D models of real fossils to populate a museum in the video game. So in addition to our tapir skull from the Gray Fossil Site in Tennessee, there were lots of 3D scans from the Smithsonian Institution, putting these things out in a way that we don't know how they're going to be reused. And that's okay, because they will get reused. There are more people that have seen this tapir skull now through this video game probably than that will ever go to that museum. So it's a way of outreaching in ways and being flexible in ways that we can't predict, and that's okay. So I'm going to kind of leave you with this thought. Over the weekend, let's see, Kelly, are you in this one? No, you aren't. Kelly is just off to the side here. But I'm going to leave you with this thought. This was a field trip with some Penn State students over the weekend where we went to the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. This was part of a paleontology course. And it reminded me, kind of why museums are really fun places to visit. And I think about this every day, but it kind of hammers it home when you go to somebody else's museum. They're places where we really lean in to the awe and wonder of the natural world. The Carnegie is a really good example of this, where you can walk among these giant sauropod dinosaurs. You can look at T-Rex up close. Even in our museum, you can look at, you can be right next to and examine very closely one of the world's largest dinosaur footprints, or the rear leg, the hind leg of a Diplodocus. Being able to be that close to something that special is one of those things that museums really try and embrace. They're platforms of platforms. platforms of public communication that are non-technical, multi-sensory, and often multi-channel. So, we can think about them not just as things in cases, but we can also bring in, sound, we can bring in tactile experiences. That's part of the reason why I got into 3D printing to begin with, because we can print things out that are tactile. Multi-channel means that we can do things that are complementary online and in person, so they can support each other. And then also remember, all of this is responsive to the community that you serve. Trying to remain relevant and remain responsive to this community, and having a framework that over the long run kind of reflects that. So I'm going to just end it there and say, if you have a broader impacts need, and you think that this is a good venue for doing that, then certainly reach out to us and let's start talking. Thank you.
All right, do we have any questions for Chris?
I've been to the one half a block away. And where is the other one?
Our off-campus facility is about halfway between here and the airport. And it's very difficult to get to right now because it's not on a bus line. So even though it's not on a bus line and it is difficult for students that don't have wheels to get there, we have 10, 12, 15 students a semester that are regularly coming out every week to help us with our inventory, to do internships, to volunteer. So, that aspect of what we do is really important to student engagement. It's one where you can get experience looking at the whole range of earth materials specimens, or the whole range of art, and different kinds of art, whether it's paintings and oils and watercolors and acrylics, or whether it's ink drawings or sculpture or something like that. So we are working with facilities to chart a way forward with some of that. So whether we can have better transportation out to there, whether we can integrate it better onto campus, and that sort of thing. So that's part of our long-term planning too.
And because the campus shuttle does go to the Penn Stater, which is away from campus, it seems like that could be a consideration for the campus shuttle loop to come to that museum.
It'd be so cool if we could get some more some better transportation out there, because we had a student last semester who was really committed to coming out and working in the collections, and walked about 1.5 miles from the end of the bus line to the collection center twice a week. And he did that until the spring started and the ticks started coming out. And then he thought, one day he showed up and he had to pick 5 ticks off him, and he said, I'm not going to do that anymore. So yeah, if we could get on some sort of transportation route, that would be fantastic.
Thank you for the talk. It's pretty cool. I think I'm more interested in terms of like how do you make the museum relevant at the university level? And I guess we were kind of talking about this like a couple of weeks ago, because I feel like in a way the number of people that you see in this room is like maybe a reflection of, I don't know, like how invested Penn State is. Like how do you see the museum and all of the suite of museums that we have in the university like becoming more relevant to the school?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's no silver bullet. A lot of it is knocking on doors and having conversations and saying, this is what the museum can do for you. And in many ways, we are kind of battling this historical trajectory of what did you think a museum is, which is why I started out with, this is what we might think that you think a museum is, but it's really not. A museum is an institution that's very flexible. It's a framework for, preserving things in perpetuity and making sure they're available for the future. And it's not just a building filled with old things in glass cases. And I think a lot of what we do is having those conversations. Here at the moment, we are having some of these conversations kind of at higher levels of administration too, which is really, really promising. And it's not always for reasons that are good reasons. Like in some cases, things happen and then you realize, oh, that shouldn't have happened. And so, we're realizing that we need to have more of a stable framework in place for preservation of collections and articulate better, why we keep these things around. What is their importance? What's their significance? And, not just in terms of why they were collected and why they were significant in that respect, but also their potential for future research or their potential for future engagement of the public and engagement of students and that sort of thing. So a lot of it is just knocking on doors and trying to find, it's communication and trying to figure out, what it is that each person needs, different communities need different things. And how can we meet those needs?
All right. I see Casey has a question online. Do you want to try unmuting yourself and we'll see if we can hear you?
Hello.
Perfect. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, great. Thanks so much for the talk. I wanted to ask more about your specific experience with NSF proposals.
Sure.
So you mentioned the 3 projects that were funded. I wonder if you can talk at all about what review panels liked about those broader impacts proposals. And I presume you've been involved in proposals that were not funded. I wonder if you can share anything about criticisms or feedback from review panels about museum-related broader impacts that in projects that didn't get funded.
Sure. For the most part, when we suggest museum exhibits or museum partnerships as part of broader impacts in NSF proposals, they are something unique. And honestly, when your proposal is being reviewed by fellow scientists, the museum aspect of that is often not in their expertise. So I will say up front, they're usually softball comments on any sort of museum broader impacts, because the response is generally, oh, that's interesting. That sounds great. Do that. Occasionally, if you have somebody that has worked with a museum before, they may chime in and say, oh, you need to up your budget or something like that to reflect what their own experiences. But generally, it's seen as, in the feedback that I've gotten on proposals that I've been part of, the feedback has been positive for, that is a unique and different kind of broader impacts, as long as you are being explicit about kind of your expectations for how many people you're going to reach, how broad is that impact going to be, and be as specific as you can. So we can be pretty specific in terms of, if you're going to install an exhibit in our museum gallery, we know who's going to come in and how many, and who's going to see it. And so being able to provide some of those details kind of strengthen that aspect of the broader impacts part of your proposal. Usually when we have had proposals turned down, I've never had a proposal turned down because the broader impacts, the museum broader impacts, didn't meet somebody's expectations. It's always been on the science. It hasn't been because of the broader impacts. So yeah, I think as long as we can be as specific as we can and make a budget that's reasonable, then it's usually a pretty strong broader impact.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure.
Any more questions for Chris? Okay, well, that's perfect timing.
You have my email.
Yes.
And so if
Yep.
you have any more questions, shoot me an email, or Patty, shoot her an email, or just look at our museum website. One of the things that will be going up in the next couple of months is some actual content on our website that gives you some guidelines or some guidance in terms of if you want to deposit a collection with the EMS Museum, what might be the process like? If you want to develop an exhibit in partnership with the EMS Museum, what might that look like? So stay tuned to our website. Within the next couple of months, we'll have some additional communications for that.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And thank you for giving your talk today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We do not have a seminar next week because it is spring break at Penn State, but there will be some digital flyers going out to follow to let you know who's next up on our list of speakers. So thanks, guys.